show on the road. Welcome, hello, welcome to COVID Culture Conundrums. This is the first episode in a series of 3, and we're talking about the cultural spiral today. My name is Zoe Routh. If you haven't listened to me or heard me before, it's Routh like mouth with an R. Who knew? It was my married name. I had to learn it all myself too. I'm a leadership expert and I specialize in people stuff. And I am passionate about helping big thinkers with big hearts make a big difference, and particularly in culture. And if you've just joined us, feel free to mute yourself so that I don't get too many distracting noises in the background. So I can see a couple of people, Tyson, Michael, and Julie. If you guys could mute yourselves, that would be fantastic. Terrific. I am so excited to share this series with you because I think culture is integral to everything in the workplace, from delivering sound strategy to actually enjoying the work that you do. And what I do in my work is I help leaders unpack the things that drive them nuts about people and give them the skills and frameworks so they can navigate it more effectively and make long-term positive solutions. So you end up building a team you love to lead, all while delivering solid results. And that's kind of what we're after. So a couple of meeting guidelines, if you like. This is interactive, and I will be asking you to do a couple things as we go along, either to do exercises on your own in the workbook that I sent out beforehand, or if you don't have your workbook, just scribbling notes, or to use the chat box and share your ideas. And there'll be a breakout room at one point as well, so you can actually talk to each other. And that's often been the huge value in these sessions I've had from the feedback in previous ones. People enjoy meeting each other and sharing each other's ideas, and not just the font of all knowledge that is coming from me. Because let's face it, I'm only one human and I know this much, and collectively we know a heap more. I want you to look for one thing that's going to be useful for you that you can take away. I mean, you're investing an hour of your time with us, and I want to make sure that it's useful for you. So keep an eye out for that one thing that's going to make a difference to you. If you need to ask a question, I likely won't see you because there's quite a panel for me. You can unmute yourself and just ask the question as we go along. If I ask you to raise your hand, I don't mean the electronic one, I mean this one, your actual real hand. And I can actually see that well on the video camera as we go. Okay, this is also a taste of Amplifiers, which is my high-level leadership program, which is about implementation and community. We focus on culture and performance stuff throughout a 12-month journey on quarterly themes. I'm not going to talk too much about Amplifiers during these sessions. There will be opportunities for you to find out more about Amplifiers if it is something you are interested in. This is a taster of what it's like to be in that community. Okay, a little bit about me. I'm Canadian, eh? If you haven't guessed my accent, there you go, now you know. I come from the land of lakes, rivers, and maple syrup, where our Prime Minister loves to wear Star Wars socks. And the biggest crime we can be accused of is of being American. My sister married an American, and we are still wondering why. But all jokes aside, we love our American cousins. So here we are. I thought I was really good at team leadership. I've been in leadership roles ever since I was about 10, from captain of the school patrols to going to getting nominated to prefect at high school, and then going to summer camp and getting leadership roles there. I loved leading teams and they loved me. So I thought, until it didn't work out so well. And one of the experiences I had when I was working at Outward Bound was I had this fabulous leadership team, a training team. And so they delivered all the professional development at Outward Bound. And it was going great until this one guy challenged my authority, challenged my ability to lead, had a completely different idea about what we should be doing in terms of our priorities at work, and would not let it go, and made it a huge issue. And I didn't know how to handle it because this has never happened to me before. I ended up backing down, and I ended up resigning from that position because of this overt conflict, this undermining experience that I went through. And it was really kind of a soul-searching experience for me. I was like, what did I do wrong as a leader? How could such a good team culture go so completely pear-shaped? And it wasn't just that one guy, even though it was easier for me to blame that one guy. What did I do as a leader or not do as a leader to cause this decay in the culture? Ever since that, I've been obsessed about how we interact as people in teams and in organizations. And I've dedicated my life to helping people live and work better as humans interacting with humans. And I think this is particularly important now as we face some of the most challenging circumstances any of us have ever experienced as a collective, as individuals, as families going through COVID. Thank you for those who shared their responses about the questions you want answered during these sessions. And we're going to be addressing some of those today and some of them each session in the Q&A section, which I'm going to do up front at the beginning. And for those questions that don't quite fit into the content, I will definitely get back to you personally and individually to make sure that you do get your questions answered as we go along. Okay. All right. So a couple people are unmuted. So Frank and Simone, welcome. Can you guys please mute yourselves? That would be terrific. Thank you. Okay. So speaking of Q&A, these are some of the big questions. Like there's themes in the questions that came through from people around how to handle COVID culture. And the big one was, in general, how do we stay positive? Because really, this sucks. And it's been sucked for a long time. It's none of us chose this. And even though there have been extraordinary benefits that have come as a result, this ongoing uncertainty and when will it ever end question is really taxing on all of our nervous systems and all of our cultures. So as leaders, how do we get our staff to stay positive? How do we get ourselves to stay positive? And I think one of the answers, which may sound counterintuitive, is maybe we can't stay positive and maybe it's okay not to be positive all the freaking time. That sounds contrarian in typical leadership circles, right? Because they're always meant to show a brave face and carry on. Well, sometimes you can't, and you really don't want to. If that's you and that's happening to you, the best thing to do is to get in a community of peers and just have a download and just have a place where you can go and be safe and feel comfortable to say, this is really hard and I'm over it. And I'm struggling with this, and to help normalize that. And just to know that everybody else is struggling with it too is really, really important. So that's the first aspect of it. It maybe doesn't sound so inspiring, does it? Don't try and be positive. That's not quite what I'm saying. So I'm saying that don't try and be positive all the time. Like sometimes we just have to admit that, yes, this is really hard. In fact, some of the research and learning I've had over the last few months about this is a little bit counterintuitive. And one of the guys I've interviewed for the podcast, so his episode will be out in November, was a US Navy SEALs guy. Chris Sinog is his name. And he has this fabulous process that he learned was embedded as a Navy SEAL, which is very applicable to us as leaders right now in terms of this positivity, managing threat thing. And the habit is anytime a SEAL goes into a new environment, they're constantly scanning for threats. They're checking exit points. They're looking, is that guy really dodgy? What if someone came at me from over here? And they do a couple of minute assessment and mental rehearsal of the worst case scenario and what they would do should the worst case scenario happen, which is very dramatic. And I definitely don't have the habit of going down to the shops and watching to see if someone's going to pull a knife on me. And it kind of scares me to think that way. And I said that to him, like, that sounds like a really scaremongering kind of way to live. And he goes, it's total opposite. He goes, what we do is we prime our brains and our nervous systems for that worst case scenario. And with the visualization piece, we're completely prepared. So we embed that in our nervous system so that we can just park it. So if something does happen, automatic, and you don't have to come up with a solution on the spot. I'm like, He says it's actually a more relaxing way to live. I'm like, okay. So let's take the lessons from that. And the lessons from that from a leadership context are, do your worst case scenario planning and really confront the brutal facts. What is coming up? how bad could it get? And what decisions would you have to make each step of the badness, I guess, or even when you end up landing in the worst case scenario, what decisions would you have to make? And how would you cope with that? Now, nobody really wants to go there. It feels counter-optimistic. It's realistic pessimism or realistic optimism, I'm not sure which, but it allows us to be prepared that we've gone down that track mentally, we've had the rehearsal, so we know that we can handle it. In that case, we can come back to the present moment and get on with what we are focusing on. And I think this is a really powerful strategy to deploy, if you like, when it comes to dealing with this ongoing uncertainty. Because all we want to do is to have some sort of line in the sand so we can move on, and that may not happen. So put your own lines in the sand by having these best case and worst case scenarios rehearsed for yourself. So the other aspect of positivity is a little bit contrary to that too, which is focus on the good little things that are happening. And I think it's easy to get caught up in the big uncertainty. It's like, always come back to, well, what is working right now? What is working? What progress have we made? And that way we can get incremental bite-sized bits of positivity as we go along. And that's also incredibly powerful. So I think you can navigate the tension of worst case scenario with what's working now and do the two of them, and it makes life a little bit easier. Will you always rock up every day going, whoa, this is a fabulous day? No. And that's okay. Make sure you do look after yourself. And that's the other really key tip around this is you got to do the fundamentals of self-care to the T during these phases. Drink lots of water, eat well, rest, decompress, do something interesting for yourself. Make sure that you do have that recovery time that is not just work, particularly if you are still working exclusively from home. You need that kind of break from the mental grinding of gears in the same environment. Okay. This one was also a really interesting question around positivity and cultures. So this one was particularly around sales culture. In this environment, a sales culture is like we celebrate wins. We celebrate the sales wins. And when sales drop off a cliff, like for many of us it has, and it's not the same like it was, like just being able to ring that bell every time a sale come in. It was a regular cadence of woohoo, and the woohoos are few and far between. That can have a demoralizing effect on the teams that are used to being able to ring that bell every time. So if your cadence of success in terms of results is not what it was and hasn't been for some time, what you can do instead, or in addition to, is to celebrate process as well as outcomes. This is a really useful strategy, COVID or no COVID anyway. And I always recommend to my clients that they keep a success journal where they record what they did that day, which was a process outcome. Like, for example, I made 5 phone calls today, as opposed to results one, which is I made 5 sales today. And recording the activity and celebrating the activity that leads to the results is often more important than the results themselves. Because if we drop off the activity that leads to the end results, then down the track, we're not going to get those results anyway. So celebrating the activity that keeps the business going, even if you don't see the immediate outcome of that for some time, is one way of getting a sense of success now, and to help compensate, I guess, from this falling away from this sales or results type of culture. So I hope that was helpful for you. Okay. All right. So protect your energy, which is the key insight for you as a leader. So a couple of myths around culture I think are really important to keep stock of. The first one is that culture is top down. It's a myth. It makes sense to think that though, right? Like the leadership team has a massive impact, has a cascading impact across the organization, but it's not the whole impact. So culture is both top down and bottom up. Culture comprises of a number of different components. One is the leadership. Yep, the leadership, the CEO, the leader themselves, their leadership team, but also the leadership of individual teams and the quality of relationships and interactions in each of those teams and between teams. That's called a bridge culture. And the bridge culture between teams is also really super important to build on. So there's a number of different microcultures within a larger, broader culture, and all of those need attention. So I think it's a misnomer to think that culture is only at the top. And having said that, if the culture in the leadership team sucks, then that will definitely cascade and have an effect through the organization. So it definitely has a magnified, amplified effect across the border, but it's not the only thing that does. So that's myth number one. Myth number two, you can't measure culture because it's the vibe of the place. Totally wrong. Of course you can map, measure, and manage culture. It's something I believe fundamentally. And the way that you can do that is you need to determine what are the results you want in the culture. What kind of evidence do you see of strong culture? And it could be things like teams interact with each other, or teams work successfully on projects together, or there is recognition between teams, say, for example. Like, you need to get granular on what you will be seeing and hearing with positive culture. Once you do that, then you can develop measures that track that outcome and those inputs as well. Otherwise, it just feels too intangible, the feeling of the place. But you absolutely can drill down and get appropriate measures for culture and also for cultural engagement using the similar principles. I've just developed a culture engagement tool that looks at 36 aspects of culture engagement that go between team and task and quality and energy and the dimensions across each of those. So there's definitely things that you can map and measure around culture. Third myth, people drive culture. I know that sounds ridiculous too. Isn't that true? Well, people do make up the culture. Like, it's not robot culture, it's people culture. But what drives the culture is actually the systems underneath the behaviors that are the sum total of a culture. The systems. And people make this mistake all the time. They blame culture problems on personalities and not process. And if we take a more systematic look at our organization and take an X-ray vision into the systems that we have in place, we can often see where culture is going well because those systems are effective, or where culture is not going well because the systems are terrible. And some common systems to pay attention to are reward, remuneration, promotions, recognition, delegation. Those are kind of like the hot button ones that we need to be mindful of when it comes to crafting systems that drive effective culture. Okay, the fourth myth is this: values guide culture. And everybody's like, what do you mean? Values are essential for culture. They're an integral part of it, but they're not driving culture. What values actually do is that they build the systems. So if you imagine like this pyramid, right? On the top, we have these behaviors of how people are interacting and speaking with each other. And that's the feel of the culture. Underneath that, we have systems that create the behavior, which drives the feelings. And underneath the systems, we have the values of the organization. And depending on what our values are, we build systems that reflect those values. If we don't do this deliberately, we will have values that are morphed into systems that we may not be consciously and deliberate about. And I think we need to be mindful of also, because a lot of organizations do values exercises. You know, this is our list of top 10 words. I worked with one firm which had one team was the policy or the value they espoused. It was completely aspirational, not real at all. Because in reality, it was like, it's my team against everybody else's team because I look after my team, and self-interest and survival is the most important value. Now, no leader would say, that's our values, we just look out for ourselves, because that sounds terrible. And it may be the reality. So if you want to change the behaviors at the top of your culture, you need to look at the systems, and most importantly, you need to look at the values at the bottom of the pyramid that are driving the whole thing in the beginning. So if you're going to need to do culture change work, you actually need to you need to do values work first, getting very articulate about what values you want to see articulated into those systems which cause the behaviors which create the culture. Okay, so that was me waxing lyrical about the myths around culture. There's some amazing research I want to share with you, which will help lead us into how to untangle some of these COVID culture issues. And some of it's good news. Oh my Lord. There's some work from home good news. And the good news is some research that was done by earlier this year by Hickman and Robeson that says optimal engagement occurs when employees spend 60 to 80% of their time working off-site. So automatically, many of us have moved to that. And some people are trying to get a balance of more on-site than off-site. 60, 80% creates optimal engagement, apparently, on 3 to 4 days a week. So the future digital world is people working from home or remotely 3 to 4 days a week. And that will produce the optimum engagement. Now, that is not true for all employees. Some employees that is not true of, and there's two main audiences where work from home and remote working is having a critically negative impact. And some of you might guess actually what these are. The first ones are working mothers. Working mothers have not enjoyed the experience of working from home. Guess what? They get no break, and they carry most of the load of their child rearing responsibilities at home. So they get sucked more into child rearing as well as more into work, and it becomes more difficult for them. There's no natural break for them. This is actually surprisingly reversed for working fathers. Working fathers have enjoyed it more because they see more of their kids, whereas before they didn't. So that's one audience that is not enjoying it so much. And the second one is young people with no dependents. Surprise, surprise. Our 20 to 30-year-olds who are not yet married, who don't have children, are really missing the community aspect of being in a workplace. And they're the ones that are suffering. So there's no one shoe fits all for employee engagement. I think we need to be really mindful of that when we're interacting with why some people are enjoying and some people aren't. And we need to find solutions to that. Okay. Oh, okay. Now we're going to go to some really cool research from McKinsey, which will help nail some of the things that we need to do in terms of turning some of this COVID culture effects, which when we talk about COVID culture effects, it's like people feeling lonely, people feeling stressed out, productivity waxing and waning, accountability waxing and waning as well. So let me just share my screen and I will talk you through a couple of things. Okay. Play, here we go. Well, here's me airing my armpits. This is not related to COVID culture. This is to give you a taste of who I am. I have been a long-time outdoor experiential educator, first in Canada leading canoe trips, and then here in Australia working at Outward Bound for 9 years, and then in my ongoing work, occasionally taking groups out into the field. And this is the top of Mount Sonder on the Larapinta Trail. So the outdoor classroom is still one of the most powerful classrooms that we can have for learning about ourselves and leadership. These are some of the people that I've worked with. Different organizations, very different sectors, from agriculture to online retail to construction, not-for-profits, universities, local and federal and state governments. Okay, oh no, what happened to my slide here? Okay. This is from McKinsey's recent research. And you have this in your workbooks. And what they found is that during COVID, there's 4 major areas that leaders need to take care of. And this first one over here, there's sort of the 4 areas are hanging loosely on the left side of the slide. The first one is providing a stable, secure work experience. So when COVID hit, one of the primary responses was, am I safe? Am I safe physically from this disease, this virus thing? Am I safe financially? Do I still have a job? And of course, many people were neither, safe from neither. So this is a big concern for folks. So making sure that we address those issues is pretty important from a culture point of view. And then what happened is we also need to be mindful as leaders of looking after trusting relationships, social cohesion and inclusion, individual purpose and contribution. Now, all those things are important, and they're broken down in these 11 categories. So stable, secure work experience has 4 main topics, trusting relationships 2, and so on. What I want you to do as an exercise right now is have a look at those 11 categories there, those 11 needs that people have in the workplace. And I want you to rank their importance from 1 to 11 based on what you think is the biggest concern for your staff, for the people that you work with. And if you don't have people that you work with, maybe it's for you. So rank what's most important to least important. So most important would be number 1 through down to 11. And I will give you a moment to do that. Just have a quick go at ranking which you think is first, which you think is second, and so on down through 11. Don't overthink it. Just have a go at ranking it. Okay, just need my clock. Here we go. This is where I need like exercise music. Do, 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 do. Okay, I'm going to check, just look at your faces and see if you look ready or not. I got chin strokings. That means they're thinking. Okay. All right. That's probably your best shot at ranking them. I'm going to reveal all. What did McKinsey's research show as the 1 to 11 outcomes? I missed one. Slide management. Okay. Fulfilling my personal purpose at work was not number 1. Number 1 was job security. Probably got that one. Guess what number 2 was? Financial stability. Number 3 was balance of work and private life. When you think about it, that makes sense, right? So we've all been smushed into our work from home experiences. There's little delineation of that. Being treated fairly was number 4, often related to number 1 and 2. Am I being treated fairly with whatever work stand down, work arrangements are in place? Number 5 is working with people I can trust, including trusting the leaders. Number 6 is physical and mental health. Number 7, achieving work goals. It's funny how this has dropped so far to the bottom of the list during this COVID time. Some of these are counterintuitive. Being rewarded, number 8. Yeah. Number 9, having supportive coworkers. Number 10, being recognized for my work. And number 11, fulfilling my personal purpose at work. Now, that's pretty interesting stuff. Let me show you what it looks like when it's ranked 1 through 11. So survival needs basically at the top, job security and financial stability. Then this balance of work and private life thing. Those are kind of the top 3. And then fairness and trust, all these like social inclusion safety ones are high priorities. And then these other ones, being recognized for my work and fulfilling my personal purpose. A lot of the research up until this point says that autonomy, mastery, and purpose were the 3 most important things. This is from Dan Pink's work in his book Drive, were the 3 things that mattered most. And during COVID, upended because of current context. So how we respond as leaders, how the narrative that we talk to needs to address these particular priorities. Now, I want to share the most other amazing things that we can learn from this whole thing. The first one is this: 23.7% increase in work effectiveness with trust in leadership. So if you prove yourselves trustworthy as a leader by being transparent, by speaking the truth, by communicating communicating effectively and frequently, this gives people a boost in their work effectiveness by 23%, almost 24%. That's amazing. Wow. Okay, next statistic. 55.5% increase in employee engagement. There's always this conversation. How do we increase employee engagement? you can have a 55% increase with non-financial recognition. What does that mean? It means that you say to Susan, Susan, great job on getting that report in on time. I really like the way that you laid it out. I thought you had some really cogent arguments in there. It made us look really professional and amazing. Good job. That kind of individual recognition, as well as public recognition, according to the individual's preference, is critical. Just telling people that you appreciate their work can give a 55.5 increase in employee engagement. That's amazing because A, it's easy to do, and B, it costs nothing. And C, most leaders aren't doing it enough, if at all. That's one of the things that surprised me the most. And some other research also showed that up to half your workforce would leave and go to another organization if they were better recognized at that other place. So just saying thank you means a big deal. Here's this one. 52.3 increase in well-being with fairness. And then not far behind it, job and financial security improved it by 53.3%. So fairness or lack of it can have a massive effect on well-being. So if you're looking at work effectiveness, engagement, and well-being as your priorities in culture, which you should be, those are really simple ways of doing it. So how do you do that? I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Trust, that's the first thing, right? And that's to get your increases in effectiveness is communicate, be transparent, admit mistakes, huge one. 2, non-financial recognition. I just ranted on about that. Make sure that you do have rituals of recognition for folks. And fairness, this is a big one. Everybody has their own perception of what fairness is. And my rule around fairness is ask them. Ask, don't tell them what's fair. Ask them what they perceive as fair and why not. Why they have that perspective. Because it's only by exploring that will you be able to discuss any potential issues with that. Okay, so there's a couple things that you can do. How are we doing? We're doing great. I want to talk about the culture spiral because that is our key topic with this. And it's essential to be aware of what happens in the cultural spiral because then you can respond to it effectively as leaders. Okay, so I'm going back to that right now. Okay, where are you, spiral? Here we are. So it's in your workbooks and it's pretty simple. It's a gardening metaphor. And whether you're gardening or you've got an agricultural background, we know that there are different phases to the growth cycle or seasonal cycle when it comes to gardens. There's the time where things are fallow. Things are like not much is happening. It looks like it's just kind of sitting there. Sometimes our culture's like that too. And having lived through many different cultural cycles at many different organizations, I know this to be true. There's times where the culture is just kind of flat. It's not fabulous. It's not terrible, but it's just kind of ready and waiting and ripe with potential. At that point though, it could also go putrid. So if nothing happens that's productive, which is the next stage, to spur that potential into activity, then it can go festy and feral and rotting. So we'll come to putrid in a moment. So from fallow, we can go to productive. So going from fallow to productive, we set goals, we set targets, we engage a plan, we galvanize the troops, and all of a sudden productive culture is when we start to kick a few goals. We start to see the fruits of our labor, if you like. So we know that the garden or the culture is actually producing something interesting. Now to go from productive to flourishing, where the garden or your culture is exploding with amazing results and things are absolutely humming and people rock up to work and they're so excited to be there and they're fully appreciative of what's going on. They're supportive of each other. To go from productive to flourishing, we need to do a couple of things, and we'll talk about the specifics in a moment, but that's the next stage, is flourishing. The next part of the cycle is actually you need a break and you need to go back to fallow. When I was at Outward Bound, I was there for 10 years, nearly 10 years, and I saw many iterations of this fallow, productive, flourishing cycle. It's a mini cycle. And occasionally it dropped into putrid when things went feral. And I'm going to get you into chat rooms in a moment to talk about what drives a culture into a putrid stage. But I noticed that throughout my time at Outward Bound that we would definitely go through these cycles. And during the fallow phase, there would be a huge exodus of key staff. It's like, oh my God, we're having a big turnover again. It felt like, is this a chronic systemic issue? What I realized, it wasn't a chronic systemic issue, as in the culture was toxic, not at all. There was a natural cycle in the workflow that meant that people came and left. And every organization has this natural attrition rate that is not necessarily unwanted. It just happens as part of the cycle. And it does take a rebuilding phase from fallow to productive to get things up and going. You cannot sustain a flourishing culture. It's too exhausting because it requires a huge amount of energy. You actually need to go through a fallow phase. All right, so I'm going to just stop that for a moment. And I would like you to share in the chat box which stage you think your culture is in right now. Fallow, productive, flourishing, or putrid. Putrid is when the leadership disappears, things are going feral, there's outright tension between people, there's nastiness, there's an erosion of activity between people. So which stage are you at? Productive, fallow, flourishing, or putrid? Just pop that into the chat box and I'll have a look. Okay. Productive, 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 fallow, productive. Okay. This exhaustive stage, yeah, that can often be end of flourishing, moving into fallow, or moving into putrid. It's on the pinnacle there. Okay. Sadly, putrid. It's not very fun. Okay. A huge mixture. Oh. Yeah, that's really hard, isn't it? It is really hard when things are not going well in a culture. It is soul destroying. And you have to do a lot to protect yourself and your own personal energy within that, especially if you don't have positional authority to change the systems. You might have influence, but not necessarily authority. So we need to be mindful of that. So I'm going to pop you guys into chat boxes for 10 minutes. And in that discussion, I would like you to discuss what you think causes a culture to go into putrid. Now, some of you are living that, so you know quite well some of the contributing factors. And when we come back, I would love to get a couple of shares around what contributes to a putrid culture. And then I'll walk you through the steps to break out of all of this stuff that we need to be mindful of. Okay, so into breakout rooms. So 10 minutes. And you will have the discussion of what causes a putrid culture. All right, see you in 10. Okay. Let's see if you guys can, hopefully you can make it work, because some of you might be on phones or iPads. I'm going to pause the recording while we're doing it. No doubt that went quickly, especially with the interruption in between. I'm so sorry about that. I would love to hear a couple of shares about what you felt drove cultures into the putrid state. So raise your hand if you'd love to share. Okay, Michael and anybody else? And Tyson. Okay. Michael, go for it.
All right. Well, in our group, I'm not muted. That's good. In our group, we spoke about a few things, and there's sort of almost a cascade of events recently. So in organisations like ours, for example, where we've got overhanging budget issues and a pending restructure, then you throw on top of that a pandemic, and you add in a dash of poor communication, and you add in some new ways that you have to do things through business, and all that uncertainty. It's a recipe for disaster. It really is. And even though the first probably 6 weeks post-COVID, as a business, we coped really well, because there was an enormous amount of communications and how to keep on top of work. And we're a non-profit, so we didn't have to get rid of staff or anything like that. So we're able to keep all our staff, and then the fun parts then as to how you maintain the momentum when you're now spread over, instead of being spread over 7 or 8 work sites, we're spread over 150 work sites.
Yeah.
So all that uncertainty and I guess fear, all that added up to a culture that sort of headed north originally post-COVID, but then south. So it's been hard to keep the momentum, and
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. And you highlight one of the key things that a lot of leaders are experiencing is that initial adrenaline surge of like, whoa, this is a major epic event that we need to rally around, just triggered cortisol and adrenaline, which gave a surge of energy. And then the thing about cortisol and adrenaline, it doesn't last that long. So a few weeks, okay, but then the sustained thing, it just gets exhausting. So uncertainty puts everybody into a primal response survival mode, and that's when we're not at our best. We can get defensive, we can have all sorts of difficult behaviors, which I call the 4 devils of people stuff. And the pandemic situation has basically pressed fast forward and amplification on all of those. Okay, thank you for sharing. Tyson, you were up next.
Yeah, so I think for us, we've been going through quite rapid change with some competing priorities in the senior leadership team, which have kind of created a little bit of a siloed environment, a bit of an us versus them mentality. I suppose through COVID, we did that quite well. All projects kind of got pushed to the side for a period of time, and there was that one focus, unified vision, purpose. We knew what we had to do and why, and we communicated that quite well. But now that we've headed back into a space of picking up all of this work again, we're at risk of falling back into that putrid kind of state.
Yeah, so you picked up on a couple of different things there. The effect of the leadership team and those silos activities can really cause abrasion between teams and competition that isn't necessarily helpful.
I think there's a lack of understanding of one purpose and vision as well, and how certain teams, while it might seem like they're butting heads with each other because they have different needs, well, in fact, they want to work towards the same goal. In the end, it's just about understanding what that is, I think.
Yeah. And being able to communicate effectively with each other around that is essential. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. There's lots of things that send cultures into the putrid state. What I want to cover in the time that we have left is go through the spiral and talk about the 3 different things around each stage that you can do to progress positively through them, including the putrid stage. Okay, so let me get back to the spiral and I'll just walk you through that. Okay. So I think the fallow stage is one of the most important stages in the cultural spiral and cycle, because this is where potential gets reaped. And if you don't handle it well, it can go putrid pretty quickly. So the 3 things you do in there: rest and renewal is pretty important. And when it comes to COVID, Michael brought this up. Have you and your people had a chance to have a break through COVID? Most people are like, I don't want to have a holiday because there's nowhere to go. And yet we need to do rest and renewal on a daily basis, as well as on a cyclical basis, whether it's a quarterly thing or a half-yearly thing or an annual thing. It's really important as teams to do that. Refresh is about making sure that you have a culture compass with agreed behaviors and boundaries around behavior. This is really, really important. If you don't have one, this is important to reset that and revisit it. And the reset piece is around making sure you have targets, goals, projects, and strategy that can galvanize excitement. So the 3 things that you need to do in the fallow stage. In the productive stage, this is all about people. To capitalize on that initial movement and activity, it's all about recognition, ramping that up, making sure that people feel good about what they're doing and that it's being noticed. Development, oh my goodness, this is so important. This is your opportunity to build skills and capacity. And this is often where we shy away from doing it. It's like, keep going, but this is where you can actually create even more ability to perform by development of your team. And the 3rd piece is challenge. It's like stretch people a little bit, nudge them, not too much, because that can lead to burnout. Just stretch them a little bit, put something else that challenges their skills and abilities and their thinking. So that's how you can tip productive into flourishing. As flourishing, And we have reap, enjoy the outcomes. When things are really humming, you actually need to take a moment and go, hey, dang, this is good. This is about celebration. Reward is about sharing the bounty, making sure that people do have rewards, even though it's listed fairly near the bottom at the moment on that McKinsey research. And reflecting, this is really super important, is reflecting on what's working and what's not and what's next. Often that gets missed out in the cultural cycles, and we just kind of lurch from one thing to another, hoping we'll stay in flourishing. You actually have to come out of flourishing and go into that fallow stage. Now, the fallow stage doesn't have to last too long, but the reflection piece allows you to move into fallow in a very systematic and safe way. Now, at putrid, if you find yourself in putrid, this is what you do. You need to take stock. How did we get here? Pruning is you do the exercise. What do we need to stop, start, and keep doing? And cleaning tools is not about cleaning house. It's about fixing the systems that are causing friction. And so again, we need to go underneath the surface and look at the systems that are causing friction. So if you have silos in your organization, what are the systems that are driving that? Is it reporting lines? Is it, what is it that's creating that? Is it accountability lines? Is remuneration schemes? It can often be at cause. Okay, so those are the little steps you can take in each one. The spiral, oh, that's in your book. Basically, the spiral is that cycle, if you manage it well, can improve the culture. So the next iteration gets stronger, and then the next iteration gets stronger. So you have this positive cycle that it allows the culture to expand and get deeper and stronger and more resilient. If you can fall out of the spiral in a positive sense into putrid at any stage, and there are triggers for that. There's two other pieces I wanted to cover tonight. We're at 5 o'clock, so we're going to do them next week. So I'm leaving you on a cliffhanger. And what we're going to be covering next at the start of next week are points of failure, which some of you are already onto, and the rules for moving up the cultural spiral. So we're going to cover those two pieces next. I have an amazing book deal for you guys, special offer for everybody who's attending the COVID Culture Conundrums workshop just for this week. I have 4 books: Composure, Moments, Loyalty, and my new one, People Stuff. At the moment, the book bundle is on the website for $96. I've slashed that in half to $49, and it's available just for you guys, only for this week. So if you want to get my books, which are full of wonderful pearls of wisdom, that's a special deal for you. Now, you have homework. The homework I want you to do between now and next time is to pull out your culture compass or your version of that for your team. And it might be group ground rules is what you call it. You might call it a culture charter. You might call it, I don't know, what else you call it? There's probably other names for it. But this is agreed behaviors that you have with your team and organization. You can do it at organization level or just specifically for your team. I want you to review that and see if it's still working for you. Is your team still signing up for that? And if you can, have a discussion with your team about your culture compass and what's working, what's not working. If you don't have a culture compass, get one done. And that's as easy as saying, what do we want and what do we don't want in the way that we work together. This is fundamental for building strong culture, no matter what phase of the spiral you're in. All right, if you have time, I'd love to hear what was useful for you in the chat box. Pop it in down there. Pop it in down there. That sounded a little bit hokey. Pop it in the chat box. What was the most useful takeaway for you? You'll get the recording afterwards. I'll send you a link to the book deal if you want to get my books, which are awesome, of course. And we'll get that on their way to you too. So if you don't have time and you need to go, thank you so much for coming along today. I appreciate it. I'm so excited to share this content with you and help you build the most amazing culture ever. Meantime, I will read what the nice things are that you are taking away from today. Okay, research. Fallow, productive, and flourishing. Thank you, Tristan. Bianca, always much more to learn. Okay, fantastic. I will stop the recording. And if people want to discuss anything, I'm around.